So I want to talk about black trans lives and why they matter. Because I feel like there's a group of people that's just basically saying, I want to be heard. I have a story to tell. Like my life says something and it means something, and I want to speak out. I want people to hear me. And I feel like that's what Black Lives Matter is saying, that I want to be heard. I want to be recognized. I want to be acknowledged. And there's a group within the black community that's saying, hey, I want to be acknowledged too. And it's like other people outside of that group in the black community are saying, shut up. We ain't talking about you. Like stop being this, stop being that. And they want to be heard, but not willing to hear others. And I feel like it's several things here. One with black trans lives is something that came to mind is a conversation I had with my little sister. She was talking about when she was sending her kids to school, and the school had this policy or something where they let the children, they're all in elementary school, where they let the children decide, whether they want to be identified as he or she. And my sister has some concerns with that. And I understand that completely. I understand having concerns, and things like that. But one thing she was saying was, I feel like if we just have love, right? If we just have love for one another, it's no need to do all that. We just need everybody to just love one another. If you just, look at another person, just love them and just, see them as a human being, and then that's all that matters, right? And during that time, I agreed, but thinking more about it, we need more than love, because with love, it also comes action that's congruent with that love, right? You don't want to be with a spouse who says, I love you, but beat you upside your head all the time. That's not love. You don't want to be with a spouse that says, I love you, but then every night they come home late because they was out somewhere else cheating on you. You want their actions to be congruent with the words that they say. So it's not enough to just say, hey, I love you as a person. I love you as a human being. Can't we all just get along? There has to be some action taken. And with that action in this American society, it has to be policy changes. Because the way America was set up, it wasn't set up for anybody other than straight white men. Right? So that's why in the civil rights movement, we're fighting for policy changes. Like we fighting for policy changes to create an environment where people can understand and hear each other and recognize each other and acknowledge each other and show love to one another. The policy creates that environment. That's why we made policies getting rid of Jim Crow laws. That's why we fought for integrating schools. That's why we fought for, rights to vote and all these other things and policy changes. That's why laws were fought to be created and changed so that we can be heard more and acknowledged more, so the environment in which we lived in will be more accepting to acknowledging who we are. And so it's not enough to just say, man, I love you, I love them. Like, the reason the schools are making changes is because they're trying to create an environment where even trans children or children who may identify, even if not then, later on in life, who may identify as being a trans person, can say, I at least feel heard or acknowledged, right? I can't even say that I agree with all of the policies or things that's been changed in school, or that I can't even say whether I agree or not, but I can't even say I understand it. And there's a misconception about with the LGBT community that people got to understand we're all allies of each other, right? All those letters, they're allies of each other, but we don't necessarily understand everybody's experience. I can't say that I understand the experience of a lesbian, right? I've never been a lesbian. I can't quite say that I may understand the experiences of somebody who's bi. It may be some things that's related, some things I'm able to understand, but I can't honestly say I understand their full experience. And I definitely can't say I understand the experience of a trans person. I don't know, but I support your efforts in being acknowledged, right? And so, in saying that, I think it's important that we say, hey, if I don't understand what you're fighting for, but let me hear from you your perspective of what you're fighting for. Because I feel like a lot of times nowadays people are just being like, man, I don't want to. They're just going off their own understanding and saying, man, y'all just men trying to be women and this and that. You know, if you stop living that lifestyle or whatever and all this other stuff, but they're not taking the time and say, hey, you know, what is your story? What's going on? I don't understand. I don't even know if I agree, but let me hear you out. Let me hear your story. Let me hear your perspective. Let me hear your experience so I can add that to my resource of information so I can make a better judgment of how I decide to go along, or in my judgment of whether I agree or not, right? And I feel like we don't even take the time to talk to our trans brothers and sisters to say, hey, you know, let me hear your story. Help me understand what you're fighting for. Let me understand why you're crying out. Let me hear your story, right? And so I think a lot of us are choosing not to expose ourselves to the fight of trans people, right? We're not choosing to expose ourselves. Like it brought me to a time where I think it was the movie The Hate U Gave, right? And I remember going to a theater, and I went like early in the morning, so it was barely anybody in the theater during that time. But I remember it was like these 3 white grandmas. I call them grandmas because they reminded me of like my grandma being her age. So these 3 white grandmas, like they came into the theater and they sat down and they were choosing to expose themselves to a movie that expressed an aspect of the black story, right? Of the black experience. They was choosing to come to that movie theater and watch it. How many of us choose to watch documentaries on trans people or to go to forums or conversations or web seminars of people explaining their story, because there's tons out there. But we don't do it enough. And I say we because even I'm guilty of it to an extent, right? I don't go out and seek the information as much as I could. So it's just choosing to expose yourself, and you're choosing not to. The same way we talk to white folks and say, you know, you're choosing not to hear us. You're choosing not to understand the black situations. You're choosing not to see movies that's explaining our experience, right? You're choosing not to do that. You're choosing not to understand us. And the same can be said about us towards trans people. We're choosing not to hear their story. And they're crying out. And another thing I hear is about, I don't like when gay people when trans people, when they try to compare their struggle to the black struggle. Like, I don't like that. Like, stop comparing it, right? Okay. So we know there's differences, right? We know there's differences. One of the biggest things about the civil rights movement and fighting for the rights of equality, a lot of it was focused on the black community, right? And the reason that was important is because there needed to be a focus, so that we're not all over the place. And so by focusing it, then from there it set itself as a model. To say, okay, now the Black community has their momentum going and they're making changes. If they can do it, people in other communities who feel oppressed or unheard can say, hey, let's take that same model and let's fight for the same thing. And the purpose of stories and why so many people and celebrities or whatever, the reason they tell their stories, they're telling it hoping that you can hear their story and find a piece of yourself in their story. So if you hear people from other communities comparing their situation to the Black struggles, it's because they hear the Black story and they find a piece of themselves in it. Why are we mad at that? They find a piece of themselves in the struggle and say, hey, just like you, I hear what you saying not being heard. I feel the same way. And so they wanna fight how you fought. And so they just say, hey, I want to be heard. I want to be listened to. And so the whole comparing, it's not about comparing. It's about them finding themselves in that story and saying, hey, I want to be heard. I want to be brave and stand up like they stood up for their struggle. I want to be brave and stand up for my struggle. Right? So it's and I think one reason we have so much trouble with that, and when I'm saying we in the Black community are having trouble with that, is because we grow up in a society where we believe that there's a lack of love. That there's not enough love to go around, right? That if we share this movement, then it's going to take away from what I get. And we got to get away from that. There's no lack of anything. There's no lack of anything. There's an abundance all around us, an abundance of love, an abundance of change, an abundance of being heard, an abundance of care, an abundance of understanding, an abundance of humanity that can go around to everybody. So I don't have to feel like I'm threatened when somebody else say, hey, my life matters too. Right? And so the reason Black trans lives matter, and the reason I'm making this video, because I just want us to know that there's enough love to go around. But just like we want the love, we got to be willing to give it. Because there's a group within our community that's feeling unheard, that's feeling ignored, that's feeling like they're not being acknowledged. And they're crying out, and it's going to impact all of us. And so in that idea of there's enough love to go around, there's enough understanding to go around, take the time to listen to your your Black trans brothers and sisters and just say, hey, let me understand your story. I hear you crying out, and I don't necessarily understand everything, and I don't know if I necessarily will understand everything, but I hear you crying out. Let me help you. Let me just give you a hug. Not now in this COVID situation, but let me reach out and let you know I hear you. Let me at least be a ear to allow you to be heard. Maybe that will help in some way, somehow. And so all I want to say is, man, Black trans lives matter, and we can't ignore that. We can't ignore that. And please, watch our energy and how we react to them and to the other members of the LGBTQ community, and how we react to other people of other communities in their fights and other struggles in other countries, because that's what we grow in our hearts. And wherever we grow in our hearts, that's what we attract from the world. And so let us work on ourselves and the love we have for ourselves, so that we could start using that and spreading it to others. So we could grow the love in them and say, hey, I hear you and I love you. Let's do this together.
JobTitle.com